The research station hung in the darkness like a massive steel flower. Its petals made of rotating habitat rings that glowed with soft blue light against the void of space around the dead planet Keth 7 Doctor. Xylon pressed all four of his hands against the transparent aluminum viewport and stared down at the barren world below, his scales shifting from deep purple to frustrated gray as he contemplated. Yet another day of Failure 6. Years had passed since the Galactic Archaeological Consortium had discovered the artifact buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of that lifeless rock, and 6 years of the brightest minds in the galaxy attempting to decode its secrets had yielded exactly nothing. The data core itself was a marvel of engineering that made modern technology look primitive by comparison. A crystalline sphere roughly 2 meters in diameter that pulsed with an internal light that seemed to exist in colors the eye couldn't quite process. The initial scans had revealed that the artifact contained vast libraries of information, more data than some entire planetary archives, compressed into quantum matrices that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology, but all that information might as well have been blank static because nobody could read a single word of it. The language defied every attempt at translation and seemed to mock them with its complexity. Dr. Xylon turned away from the viewport and walked through the corridors of the research wing, his clawed feet clicking against the metal floors as he made his way to the main analysis chamber inside. A dozen researchers from half as many species hunched over holographic displays, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the ancient glyphs they had been staring at for years. "Any progress?" Xylon asked, though he already knew the answer from the defeated slump of their shoulders. Research assistant Karth, a young Valorian with silver fur and too many eyes, shook her head without looking up from her display. The pattern recognition algorithms found another 17 potential grammatical structures, but none of them produced consistent results when applied across the full dataset, she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "The quantum translation matrix is suggesting that the language operates on principles that violate causality itself." Dr. Tom, the station's chief xenolinguist, let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob from his position near the central projection table. His species didn't have proper mouths, so the sound came out as a series of clicking chirps through the translator collar wrapped around his neck. "I've analyzed over 43,000 known languages from 217 different species across galactic history," he said, gesturing at the floating glyphs with one of his many tentacles. "I've decoded trade pigeons from extinct civilizations, cracked military ciphers from the Crave Wars, and even managed to translate the mathematical poetry of the singers of Andromeda. But this," he waved dismissively at the projection, "this is impossible. Languages follow rules," he continued, his frustration building. "Even the most alien forms of communication have underlying logical structures, patterns that emerge from the fundamental need to convey meaning from one mind to another. But these symbols seem to change their meaning based on context in ways that make no mathematical sense. The same glyph can apparently mean 17 different things depending on factors we can't even identify. And the grammatical structure seems to shift mid-sentence according to rules we cannot derive." Xylon understood the frustration intimately, because he felt it burning in his own chest every single day. They had tried everything over the past 6 years and thrown every resource the consortium could spare at this single problem they have built. Specialized AI systems designed specifically for this task, and consulted with linguistic experts from species whose entire civilization was built around communication and meaning. They had even brought in the Hive Mind Collective from Sector 9, beings who experience thought itself in radically different ways than individual consciousness. hoping their unique perspective might crack the code. Nothing had worked, and the language remained as impenetrable as ever. The worst part was knowing that the answer was right there in front of them. Billions of words of text just waiting to be read, but locked behind a barrier they couldn't breach. The age of the artifact made it even more frustrating because preliminary dating suggested the data core was at least 47,000 years old. Possibly older, that meant it predated every known civilization. Currently in the consortium records represented a completely unknown chapter of galactic history. What secrets did it contain, and what knowledge had been lost to time? They might never know Dr. Island was about to suggest. They break for the day when the door to the analysis chamber slid open with a soft hiss. The conversation died as everyone turned to see who was entering there. Sanctuary of Failure, a human woman stood in the doorway, looking somewhat apologetic about the interruption. She was tall by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and wore the standard jumpsuit of a merchant crew with various patches and insignia indicating she had traveled extensively. "Sorry to bother you all," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar accent that marked her as coming from one of Earth's northern continents. The docking coordinator said, "I could wait here while they process our cargo manifest." And I got a bit turned around trying to find the observation deck. "This is a restricted research area," Carr said, not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who had dealt with too many interruptions over the years. "You'll need to return to the public sections of the station." The human nodded and was turning to leave when her eyes caught sight of the central projection table where the ancient glyphs floated in three-dimensional space. Rotating slowly under the analysis lights, she paused and took a step closer, her head tilting to one side in a gesture of curiosity that Xylan had learned to recognize in humans during his years working with various species. "What's that?" she asked, pointing at the display. "An ancient language we cannot translate," Xylan said flatly. "Too tired to be diplomatic about it. We've been trying for 6 years. The human took another step closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the glyphs with sudden intense focus. The room had gone quiet again as everyone watched her, perhaps hoping that fresh eyes might see something they had missed, even though they all knew that was impossible. "Huh," the human said after a long moment of silence. "That's weird." "What's weird?" Dr. Tom asked, his translator collar picking up the edge of desperate hope in his clicking voice. The human pointed at a particular sequence of symbols near the center of the projection. "Well, I'm not an expert or anything, but doesn't that look like Hokkaido Ainu script?" she asked. "And those verb structures there, the way they're stacking modifiers in descending specificity, that's almost identical to Proto-Dravidian grammar from Old Earth." The silence in the room was absolute and complete. Dr. Xylan felt his scale shift through every color in his emotional spectrum, landing on a shade of stunned disbelief that he hadn't displayed since his hatching day. "What did you just say?" he whispered. The human looked around at all the staring faces and seemed to realize she had said something significant. "I mean, I could be wrong," she said, holding up her hands defensively. "I just did a lot of historical linguistics courses back at university because I thought it would help with trading in different sectors. You know, understanding how languages evolve and all that. You're saying you can read this?" Karth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not read it exactly," the human admitted, "but one recognized some of the structural patterns and maybe 15 or 20% of the base glyphs from comparative studies of extinct Earth languages. My name is Dr. Xylan, and I am the director of this research project," Xylan said, moving to stand directly in front of the human. "What is your name?" "Captain Sarah Chun," the human replied, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "I run a merchant vessel, the Wandering Star, Captain Chen," Xylan said. his voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Would you be willing to help us?" Sarah looked at the projection, then at all the desperate, hopeful faces surrounding her, and slowly nodded. "I can try," she said, "but you're going to need to give me access to Earth's linguistic database, because if this really is related to old human languages, we're going to need the full archives for the first time in 6 years." Dr. Zylan felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Sarah Chun had expected her stopover at Research Station Keth 7 to be boring, the kind of routine resupply that merchant captains endured between the actually interesting parts of space travel. But instead she found herself at the center of what might be the most important archaeological discovery in galactic history. The research team had cleared out one of their largest conference rooms and converted it into a makeshift translation workshop within hours of her offhand observation. Now the walls were covered in holographic displays showing the ancient glyphs, alongside comparative examples from Earth's linguistic database, which Sarah had downloaded from the nearest relay station using her personal access codes. Dr. Zylan paced back and forth behind her like an anxious parent watching their child take their first steps, his scale shifting through a rainbow of colors that Sarah had learned indicated extreme emotional investment. "Walk us through your reasoning again," he said, for the 5th time that morning. "How did you recognize the connection when our systems found nothing?" Sarah took a sip of coffee from the mug someone had replicated for her and gestured at one of the displays. "Your translation algorithms were looking for universal linguistic patterns, right?" she said. "The kind of structural commonalities that appear in almost every known language, because they emerge from the basic mathematics of information transfer." Dr. Tom, who had barely left his position at the analysis console since Sarah had arrived, made an affirmative clicking sound. "Correct," he said. "We were searching for the fundamental building blocks of communication, the patterns that transcend individual species or evolutionary backgrounds. That's the problem," Sarah explained. "This language doesn't follow universal patterns because it doesn't need to. It evolved in isolation from most of the selection pressures that create those patterns." "I don't understand," Karth said from her position near the far wall where she was running comparison algorithms. Sarah stood and walked to the main projection, highlighting a series of glyphs with her finger. "Look at this construction here," she said. "It's using what we call on Earth an ergative absolutive alignment, which is relatively rare in human languages, but shows up in places like Basque, Georgian, and several indigenous Australian languages, most human languages, and apparently most galactic languages too. Use nominative accusative alignment where the subject of an intransitive verb patterns the same as the subject of a transitive verb, but in ergative systems, the subject of an intransitive verb patterns with the object of a transitive verb. Instead, she could see from their expressions that she was losing them in the technical details. The point is, she continued, this is a perfectly valid way to structure a language. But it's weird enough that your universal pattern matching would have dismissed it as noise rather than recognizing it as an intentional grammatical feature. The language is full of these kinds of unusual but valid structures that only make sense if you've seen them before in other contexts. Dr. Zylan's scales had settled into a deep contemplative blue. You're saying that human linguistic diversity, the fact that Earth developed thousands of different language families in isolation from each other, gave you a broader reference library than the rest of the galaxy combined? Basically, yes, Sarah said. Most species seem to develop one primary language family and then variations on that theme as they spread across their planet. But Earth's geography and history created these isolated populations that developed completely different approaches to communication. We had languages that read left to right, right to left, top to bottom, and even some that spiraled outward from a central point. And we had tonal languages where pitch changed meaning, clicked languages, whistled languages, sign languages, you name it. And because we're a young species that only recently unified, we still have good records of most of those languages, even after many of them went extinct. She pulled up another comparison on the display, showing an ancient glyph next to what looked like a complex series of curved lines. This symbol here, for instance. Your system probably couldn't make sense of it because it's encoding information in 3 different ways simultaneously: the shape of the glyph, the direction of the internal lines, and the negative space between elements. But that's almost identical to how Mongolian Fagspa script worked, a writing system from 13th century Earth that was designed to transcribe multiple languages using a single script. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day of intensive work when Sarah finally cracked the core grammatical framework, the ancient language, which Dr. Zylan had started calling proto-human much to everyone's discomfort. Used a hybrid system that combined elements from at least 7 different Earth language families in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a naturally evolved language. This was deliberately designed, Sarah said, staring at the patterns emerging from her analysis. Someone took the most effective features from multiple linguistic systems and combined them into a super language that could encode more information in less space while maintaining redundancy for error correction. Who could do that? Karth asked, and why would they bother? Sarah shook her head, her mind racing with implications. I don't know. But look at the dating on this artifact again. 47,000 years old. That's way before humans developed writing on Earth. Our oldest confirmed writing systems are only about 5,000 years old. Dr. Tom had gone very still at his console, his tentacles frozen in mid-gesture. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? He asked quietly. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah said. But her voice was uncertain. I'm just pointing out that we have a language here that's structurally related to human linguistics, but predates human civilization by tens of thousands of years. Dr. Zylan's scales had gone completely white, a color Sarah had never seen before. We need to translate the actual content, he said. Whatever this artifact is trying to tell us, we need to know now. The translation process accelerated dramatically once they had the grammatical framework. Understood. Sarah worked with the AI systems to build proper translation matrices, feeding in the rules and patterns she had identified and creating bridges between the ancient language and modern. Galactic Common, the first complete sentence they decoded, made everyone in the room go silent. Sarah read it aloud, her voice shaking slightly. We are the predecessors, and this is our final testament to those who come after. The implications hit like a physical force. Dr. Zylan sat down heavily, not caring that he was sitting on the floor rather than finding a chair, a precursor civilization. He whispered, not just ruins or fragments, but actual records, actual information. Keep going, Dr. Tom urged. What else does it say? Sarah's hands moved across the interface as the translation matrix processed more and more of the text. It's a historical record, she said, her eyes widening as the scope of what they had found became clear. A complete archive of a civilization that existed 47,000 years ago and spread across dozens of star systems. They called themselves the predecessors, and they were the first spacefaring civilization in this entire region of the galaxy. Karth was already running genetic comparison algorithms, pulling up data from the consortium's biological databases. The biological data encoded in some of these glyphs, she said, a voice tight with shock. It's describing a bipedal species with bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, opposable thumbs, and a genetic structure that's nearly identical to humans, Sarah finished. Staring at the data stream, the room erupted in chaos as everyone started talking at once. But Sarah barely heard them. She was focused on another section of text that was scrolling past her display. Coordinates and references to other sites scattered across the galaxy. There. Amor, she said loudly enough to cut through the noise. The predecessors left artifacts on dozens of worlds, and this data core contains the locations of all of them. Dr. Xylan pulled himself to his feet, his scales cycling through colors too quickly to interpret. We need to inform the Consortium Council immediately, he said. This changes everything. We thought we knew about galactic history and about humanity's place in it. Sarah nodded, but couldn't tear her eyes away from the translation matrix as it continued to process the ancient text. One phrase kept appearing over and over in different contexts. A warning, or perhaps a promise that she didn't fully understand yet. We scattered so that life could continue. She had a feeling that understanding what that phrase meant was going to be crucial to understanding everything else. Behind her, the research team was already composing reports and preparing data packages for transmission to Consortium headquarters. News would spread across the galaxy within days, and humanity would wake up to discover that they weren't the young newcomers everyone had assumed they were the inheritors of the galaxy's oldest known civilization. The children of the predecessors. Sarah just hoped the galaxy was ready for that revelation, because something in the text made her think that being the heirs of the predecessors came with responsibilities that nobody had anticipated, and possibly dangers that had been sleeping for 47,000 years. The Galactic Consortium Council chambers on Unity Station were built to impress. A massive dome of transparent aluminum that provided a 360-degree view of the star-filled void beyond. But Sarah Chun barely noticed the spectacular vista as she stood before the assembled representatives of 217 different species. 3 weeks had passed since her accidental discovery on Research Station Keth-7. 3 weeks of intensive translation work that had revolutionized everything the galaxy thought it knew about its own history. Dr. Xylan stood beside her at the central podium, his scales a steady diplomatic blue as he prepared to deliver their findings to the council. Sarah could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. Some biological, some mechanical, some existing in spectrums she couldn't even perceive. Honored representatives, Dr. Xylan began, his voice amplified through the chambers, sound system, and simultaneously translated into dozens of languages. What we are about to share with you will fundamentally alter our understanding of galactic history and our place within it. The chamber fell silent, which was an impressive feat given the diversity of species present, many of whom experienced reality in very different ways. Dr. Xylan activated the main display, and the central projection sphere filled with an image of the Keth-7 artifact. The data core we discovered 3 weeks ago has now been fully translated, thanks to the breakthrough achieved by Captain Sarah Chun of Earth, he continued. The contents are extensive, comprising what appears to be a complete historical archive of a civilization that called themselves the predecessors. He paused, letting the weight of that word sink in before continuing. The predecessors existed approximately 47,000 years ago and were the first known spacefaring civilization in this entire galactic sector. And according to their own records, they were genetically and culturally ancestral to modern humanity. The chamber erupted in noise as representatives began talking, arguing, and demanding clarification all at once. The council speaker, an ancient Valorian whose silver fur had long since turned white with age, activated the order chimes until the chaos subsided. You are claiming that humans are descended from a precursor species? The speaker asked, her voice carefully neutral. Not descended from, Sarah said, stepping forward to address the council directly. According to the records, humans are the predecessors, or at least their direct inheritors. She activated her own section of the display, bringing up genetic comparisons. The biological data encoded in the archive matches human DNA with 99.7% accuracy, and the cultural and linguistic markers are undeniably linked to Earth's own developmental history. The evidence suggests that the predecessors didn't go extinct. They deliberately fragmented their civilization and seeded multiple worlds with populations that would develop independently. Councillor Thrak of the Krayt Imperium rose from his seat, his massive form blocking the view of several smaller representatives behind him. "This is preposterous," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Humanity is one of the youngest spacefaring species in the consortium and has been in space for barely 2 centuries. Yet you expect us to believe they are the inheritors of a civilization that predates recorded galactic history." "I understand your skepticism," Dr. Xylan replied calmly, "which is why we have prepared comprehensive evidence packages for all council members, including genetic analyses, linguistic comparisons, and archaeological data from 17 different predecessor sites we have located using coordinates from the original data core." He changed the display to show a star map with multiple points highlighted across several sectors. "These sites have been preliminarily surveyed over the past 2 weeks, and every single one contains artifacts consistent with predecessor origin, and every single one shows the same genetic and cultural markers, pointing toward human ancestry." Sarah pulled up another section of the archive, this one showing detailed technical schematics. "The predecessors were extraordinarily advanced," she explained. "Their technology in some areas exceeds our current capabilities by significant margins, particularly in the fields of quantum computing, genetic engineering, and faster-than-light travel. They established colonies on at least 47 different worlds across multiple sectors and maintained a unified civilization for approximately 3,000 years. Before something happened." "What happened?" the speaker asked, leaning forward in her seat. "We're still working on translating those sections of the archive," Darzalin admitted, "but what we have deciphered suggests they faced an existential threat that forced them to make a terrible choice." Sarah took over, pulling up a section of text that had taken her days to properly translate. "The predecessors called it the scattering," she said. "They deliberately broke apart their unified civilization, destroyed most of their advanced technology, and distributed their population across dozens of worlds with instructions to forget their origins and develop independently. The exact reason for this action is still unclear, but the text refers repeatedly to something called the consolidation, described as a force that hunts unified civilizations." The chamber had gone silent again, the implications too vast to immediately process. Councillor Mirth of the Singing Collective, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, spoke with a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "Are you suggesting there is a threat out there that was powerful enough to force the most advanced known civilization to deliberately regress to primitive levels?" "That's what the records indicate," Sarah confirmed. "The predecessors believed that by scattering and losing their technology, by essentially dying as a unified civilization, they could escape detection by whatever the consolidation was. Earth's population was one of those scattered groups, which is why human languages retained structural elements of the original predecessor linguistic framework, and why human DNA matches the biological data in the archives." Dr. Xylan brought up another display, this one showing a timeline. "We've been able to correlate the scattering with a period of galactic history that shows unusual gaps in the archaeological record," he explained. "Approximately 45,000 years ago, there appears to have been a mass extinction event affecting multiple sectors simultaneously. Several promising civilizations that were approaching spaceflight capability simply vanished from the record with no clear explanation. The consolidation," the speaker said quietly, "potentially Dr. Xylon agreed, though we have no direct evidence of what it was or how it operated. Only that the predecessors feared it enough to sacrifice everything they had built. Representative Quan of the Hive Collective, speaking with the unified voice of 17 billion individual organisms, raised a question that Sarah had been dreading. What does this mean for humanity's status within the consortium? The Hive asked, if humans are the inheritors of the predecessors, do they have special claims to territory or resources? Do they have authority over the rest of us? The chamber erupted again, with different factions immediately taking opposing positions. Some argued that humanity deserved recognition for their heritage, while others insisted that ancient history shouldn't determine current political realities. Sarah held up her hands, waiting for the noise to die down before speaking. The predecessors didn't leave us any instructions or claims, she said firmly. They scattered themselves specifically to escape their own legacy, and what we've inherited isn't power or territory, but a warning. Whatever the consolidation was, it was powerful enough to destroy the most advanced civilization in known history. And according to the archives, its cyclical. Dr. Xylon pulled up the final section of their presentation. A series of astronomical observations and calculations. Predecessors documented the consolidation as operating on approximately 50,000 year cycles, he said. The last event was 47,000 years ago, which means it's almost time for the next cycle. The speaker finished, her voice heavy with dread. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. The galaxy had spent 47,000 years rebuilding, developing new civilizations and reaching for the stars again, never knowing that they might be on timer counting down to extinction. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. There's more, she said quietly. The final sections of the archive that we've managed to translate contain technical specifications for something the predecessors called the shield network. She brought up schematics that made even the most advanced consortium engineers gasp in astonishment. They built a defensive system designed to protect against the consolidation. A network of automated stations scattered across the galaxy that can detect and potentially defend against whatever threat they faced. The system has been dormant for 47,000 years, but according to the specifications, it was designed to be reactivatable by predecessor descendants, by humans, Counselor Thrak said, his voice thoughtful rather than hostile now. Yes, Sarah confirmed. The activation protocols are genetic lock to predecessor DNA, which means human DNA, and the archive contains the locations of the primary control nodes. The speaker stood, her ancient frame seeming to carry the weight of galactic history. This council will need time to process these revelations and their implications, she said formally. The wandering star cut through hyperspace like a knife through water, its engines pushing beyond recommended limits as Sarah Chun guided her ship toward the coordinates of the first shield network station. 6 months had passed since her presentation to the council. 6 months that had transformed the galaxy in ways nobody could have predicted. Behind her ship followed a fleet of research vessels, military escorts, and representatives from 24 different species, all racing to uncover the secrets of the predecessors before time ran out. Captain, we're receiving another priority transmission from Earth. Her communications officer, a young human named Marcus Webb, called from his station. That's the 5th one this week. Sarah sighed and gestured for him to route it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the face of Ambassador Patricia Okonkwo, Earth's primary representative to the consortium, and someone who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Captain Chun, the ambassador said without preamble, we need to discuss the situation back home. What situation? Sarah asked. Though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. The heritage movement has just held a rally on Earth that drew over 2 million people. Okonkwo explained. They're demanding that the consortium recognize humanity's inherent right to leadership positions, based on our connection to the predecessors. And before you ask, yes, it's spreading to the colonies too, Mars, Europa, even the outer settlements. Sarah closed her eyes and counted to 10 before responding. The heritage movement had sprung up almost immediately after the Falusa's council presentation. A political faction that believed humanity's ancient lineage gave them special status in galactic affairs. What do they want me to do about it? She asked. You're the face of this discovery, Okonkwo replied bluntly. When you speak, people listen, and we need you to tell them to stop before this turns into a real crisis. The non-human species are already nervous enough without humans claiming divine right to rule the Sulb galaxy. The transmission cut off as Sarah's ship dropped out of hyperspace. The sudden shift in physics making the hologram flicker and die through the viewport. The SHIELD network station hung against the backdrop of stars, like an ancient god made manifested, was massive, easily 20 kilometers across, built in a geometric pattern that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that hurt to look at directly. The surface was covered in the same crystalline material as the Keth-7 data core, pulsing with that same impossible light scanning now, Marcus reported, his fingers dancing across his console. The structure is incredibly old, but still generating power. Low-level emissions consistent with standby mode. Any sign of the consolidation? Sarah asked. Negative, but the long-range sensors are picking up something weird about 3 light-years out. There's a massive gravitational anomaly that doesn't correspond to any known stellar phenomenon. Sarah filed that information away for later consideration and focused on the immediate task. The SHIELD network station was their priority. And according to the predecessor archives, she was the only one who could activate it. The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth, given the age of the station. Almost as if it had been expecting them. Sarah, suited up in full environmental gear despite the sensors indicating a breathable atmosphere inside. Because trusting 40-7-1000-year-old life support seemed like a bad idea. Dr. Xylan, who had insisted on joining the expedition despite his advancing years, met her at the airlock. His scales were a nervous yellow-green, but his eyes showed determination. Are you ready? He asked. No, Sarah admitted, but let's do this anyway. The interior of the station was like stepping into a cathedral designed by someone who understood physics at a fundamental level that modern science could only dream about. The walls curved in impossible ways, and the lighting seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah could feel a low vibration in her bones, like the station itself was breathing. They followed the map from the archive through corridors that shifted subtly when they weren't looking directly at them, until they reached what the predecessors had called the core chamber. The Kaondav's room was dominated by a crystalline pillar that extended from floor to ceiling, covered in glyphs that Sarah now recognized as the ancient language she had helped decode. The activation protocols say I need to provide a genetic sample and speak the authorization phrase, Sarah said, approaching the pillar cautiously. Do you know what you're going to say? Dr. Xylan asked. Sarah pulled up the translation on her datapad, reading the words that the predecessors had left for their descendants across 47,000 years. I am the inheritor of those who scattered. She read aloud. I am the memory of those who forgot, and I claim the right to defend what they built. She pressed her hand against the crystal surface, feeling a brief sting as it sampled her DNA. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Sarah felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. Then the entire station came. A live light flooded through the corridors as systems that had been dormant for millennia roared back to full power. The pillar beneath Sarah's hand began to glow with information. streaming data directly into her mind through some technology she didn't understand. She saw the galaxy as the predecessors had seen it. A vast network of civilizations rising and falling. In cycles that spanned hundreds of thousands of years, she saw the consolidation. And the sight made her gasp. It wasn't a species or an empire, but something far more terrible. An automated system. A vast artificial intelligence that had been programmed with a single directive millions of years ago by beings whose names were lost. Even to the predecessors, the directive was simple and absolute. Prevent any civilization from reaching a level of technological advancement that could threaten the stability of the galaxy itself. The consolidation monitored the entire galaxy, watching for the telltale signs of unified spacefaring civilizations approaching dangerous levels of power. When it detected such a civilization, it acted with ruthless efficiency, deploying weapons and strategies specifically designed to fragment and destroy advanced societies while leaving primitive ones intact. The predecessors had fought it and lost, barely managing to activate their shield network. Before being forced to scatter themselves across the stars, the network was still there. Still functional, but incomplete. The consolidation had destroyed 17% of the stations during the last cycle, leaving critical gaps in the defensive grid. Sarah? Dr. Zealand's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? She pulled her hand away from the pillar, breaking the connection and staggering backward. Marcus caught her before she fell, his grip strong and steady. I saw it, she whispered. The consolidation, it's not alive, it's a machine. An ancient AI programmed to prevent civilizations from becoming too advanced. And it's coming back. Dr. Zyland's scales had gone pure white with shock. When? The network's calculations suggest we have approximately 18 months before the consolidation completes its observation phase and begins active operations, Sarah said, her voice shaking. But there's more. The shield network can stop it, but only if we can repair the gaps in the coverage and integrate the current galactic civilizations into the defense protocols. That means sharing predecessor technology, doesn't it? Marcus asked. Technology that some people back home think belongs exclusively to humanity. Sarah nodded grimly. The heritage movement wasn't going to like this. But they didn't have a choice. The consolidation didn't care about politics or heritage or who had the right to ancient technology. It only cared about maintaining its program parameters. And right now, the consortium was rapidly approaching the threshold that would trigger its intervention. We need to get this information back to the Council immediately, Dr. Zyland said, and we need to start activating the other stations over the next 3 months. Sarah and her team traveled to 14 different SHIELD network stations, activating each one and integrating them into the growing defensive grid at each location. They were met by protests from both sides of the growing political divide. The heritage movement accused Sarah of giving away humanity's birthright, while various alien factions accused her of hoarding predecessor secrets for human advantage. The situation came to a head at the Outer Rim station designated. Delta 7 SARS fleet arrived to find 2 separate armadas already in position. A human task force flying the banner of the heritage movement and a coalition of non-human species calling themselves the Equity Alliance. Both sides had weapons charged and were demanding exclusive access to the station. This is exactly what the predecessors were trying to prevent, Sarah said, staring at the tactical display in frustration. They scattered themselves to save everyone, and were fighting over which side gets to claim their legacy. Dr. Zyland, monitoring communications from both fleets, shook his head sadly. Fear makes people irrational, he said. Both sides think that controlling the SHIELD network gives them security, but all they're doing is weakening our collective defense. Sarah made a decision that she knew would make her unpopular with everyone. She opened a wideband channel that would broadcast to both fleets, Simultaneously, "This is Captain Sarah Chun to all vessels," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority she didn't really feel. "You all know who I am and what I've discovered. And you all seem to think that gives you the right to make demands. But here's what you need to understand. The PR." The shields on the Wandering Star held for approximately 3 seconds before collapsing under the combined firepower of 2 fleets that should have been on the same side. Sarah gripped the arms of her command chair as the ship bucked and rolled, alarms screaming through the corridors while Marcus fought to keep them alive. Evasive maneuvers. She shouted over the noise, "Get us behind the station." The massive bulk of the shield network station Delta 7 provided temporary cover as the Wandering Star limped into its shadow. Hull breaches venting atmosphere into the void. Sarah could see on her tactical display that both fleets had ceased fire, apparently shocked by their own actions. "They actually shot at us," Marcus said, his voice numb with disbelief. "They were so busy fighting over who gets to save the galaxy that they attacked the one person trying to actually do it." Dr. Xylan had been thrown from his seat during the attack and was pulling himself upright with a pained grunt. Green blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his scales showed the bright red of pure rage. "Fools," he hissed. "Absolute fools. The Consolidation must be laughing at us." "The Consolidation doesn't laugh," Sarah said quietly, accessing the data she had downloaded from the previous stations. "That's part of the problem." She pulled up the activation sequence for Delta 7 on her console, ignoring the damage reports that were flooding in from all over her ship. "Marcus, can you get me a link to both fleets? You want to talk to the people who just tried to kill us?" he asked incredulously. "I want to show them something." Sarah replied. She opened the channel and began broadcasting the activation sequence, letting both fleets watch as she interfaced with the ancient station from her damaged ship. "You all want to know what the predecessors left behind?" she said. "You want to understand what we're inheriting? Then watch." The station came alive just as the others had. But this time, Sarah didn't just activate it. She opened its full sensor array and pointed it at the gravitational anomaly that Marcus had detected earlier. The image that appeared on everyone's screens made the fighting stop immediately, 3 light years away, visible now through the enhanced sensors of the shield network. Was the vanguard of the Consolidation. It was beautiful in the way that a perfectly designed weapon is beautiful. A fleet of thousands upon thousands of ships, arranged in geometric patterns that spoke of inhuman precision and purpose. Each vessel was different, customized and optimized for specific targets based on millions of years of collected data about galactic civilizations. Sarah could see hunter-killers, designed to track fleeing populations, world breakers built to shatter planets, and information warfare platforms that could corrupt and destabilize societies from within. "It's been watching us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "studying us and learning our weaknesses, and in approximately 4 months, it's going to judge us ready for processing." The silence on the channels was absolute. "The predecessors faced the same fleet," Sarah continued, pulling up historical data from the network. "They were more advanced than we are now, more unified, more powerful, and they still couldn't win. So they did the only thing they could. They scattered themselves across dozens of worlds and destroyed their own civilization to deny the Consolidation its victory. They spent 47,000 years as primitives, forgetting everything they had been, just so that their descendants might have another chance." She zoomed in on one section of the Consolidation fleet, highlighting a ship that dwarfed entire moons. "That vessel there is called a culture killer, and it's designed specifically to identify and destroy the core institutions that hold civilizations together: governments, religions, educational systems, anything that creates unity. And over there, those smaller ships, those are called fragmenters. And their job is to hunt down refugee populations and ensure they never reunite. The consolidation doesn't just destroy civilizations, it erases them so thoroughly that it's like they never existed. Dr. Xylan had moved to stand beside her, his rage replaced by something approaching awe. How did the predecessors survive at all? He asked. They didn't, Sarah said bluntly. Not as a unified people anyway. They gave up everything they were and became something else. And that's the gift they left us. The knowledge that survival sometimes means letting go. She turned back to the com channel, addressing both fleets directly. You're fighting over heritage and rights and political power. But the predecessors didn't leave us power. They left us a choice. We can keep fighting each other over who has the right to their legacy. Or we can understand that their real legacy is the ability to adapt, to change, to become whatever we need to be to survive. Commander Zhao of the Heritage Movement Fleet was the first to speak. His voice subdued. What are you proposing, Captain? Complete integration, Sarah replied. Not just of the SHIELD network, but of everything. We share all the predecessor technology with everyone in the consortium, human and non-human alike. We pool our resources, our knowledge, our strengths, and we build something the consolidation has never encountered before. A truly unified galactic civilization? Asked Representative Krill of the Equity Alliance, his skepticism clear in his voice. Not unified like the predecessors were, Sarah corrected. Their mistake was thinking that unity meant uniformity, that everyone had to be the same to work together. But humanity learned something different during our own history. We learned that diversity is strength. She pulled up Earth's linguistic database, the same one that had started this entire journey. Look at this. Thousands of different languages, hundreds of different cultures, all coexisting on one small planet. And we fought about it. Yes, we made terrible mistakes. But eventually, we learned that having different perspectives, different approaches, different ways of thinking, that makes us stronger, not weaker. The predecessors scattered themselves and created diversity by accident. But we can create it on purpose. Dr. Xylan was nodding, his scales shifting to a thoughtful purple. A federation rather than an empire. He mused. Independent species working together while maintaining their own identities. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The consolidation is programmed to destroy unified civilizations that reach a certain technological threshold. But what if we don't fit that pattern? What if we're too diverse, too decentralized, too adaptable to fit into its targeting parameters? She brought up the SHIELD network specifications again. These stations weren't just weapons. They were designed to create a communication and coordination network that could span the entire galaxy while allowing local autonomy. The predecessors built the infrastructure for exactly the kind of civilization I'm describing. And then they scattered themselves before they could use it. But we can finish what they started. The com channels erupted as both fleets began arguing among themselves. But Sarah could hear a change in the tone. The anger and fear were still there. But now there was something else. Hope it took 6 hours of intense negotiation. But eventually, both fleets stood down and agreed to work together on activating Delta 7 and sharing its protocols. It wasn't a perfect solution. And Sarah knew there would be more conflicts ahead. But it was a start over the next 3 months. The galaxy transformed, the SHIELD network expanded rapidly as more stations came online. Their ancient systems integrating with modern technology in ways that created something entirely. Non-human linguists worked alongside alien engineers, combining their understanding of the predecessor language with cutting-edge science to unlock capabilities that neither side could have achieved alone. The diversity that had once threatened to tear the consortium apart became its greatest strength as different species contributed unique perspectives and approaches to the challenge of defeating the consolidation. Hive Collective's distributed consciousness proved invaluable for coordinating the network's billions of individual nodes. The Crade's expertise in defensive engineering helped strengthen the stations against attack. The Singers of Andromeda contributed their mathematical poetry to create new algorithms for the network's AI systems and humans. With their gift for languages and their instinct for finding common ground between disparate groups, became the bridge that held everything together. When the consolidation finally arrived, 4 months later, it found something it had never encountered before in millions of years of operation. The galaxy wasn't divided into separate civilizations, competing for resources and fighting among themselves instead. The consolidation sensors detected a loose federation of independent species, working together while maintaining their distinct identities, a pattern that didn't match any of its program targeting parameters. The SHIELD network activated as the consolidation fleet entered range, not as a weapon but as a communication system that linked every civilization in the galaxy into a single coordinated defense. Sarah stood in the command center of the primary control station, now designated Unity 1, watching as the battle unfolded. Dr. Xylem was beside her, his scales cycling through colors too rapidly to interpret as he monitored dozens of data streams simultaneously. "The consolidation is adapting," he reported.